Welcome to the Archetypal Mosaic. This is Mikhail Tank. Today's show is with guest Larry Lee Litke, who was a district attorney and a deputy county council, and is now a very wise and brilliant elder in our society. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
This is right on the eve of your 85th birthday, so from all the listeners, we wish you well-being and health.
Thank you. I'll be 85 tomorrow.
Now, we're going to be discussing a very unique topic which Larry has had first-hand experience in, and this is an important topic for generations to come, because this is about cults and a cult leader that is very well known, and how Larry tried to save the situation and wrote a very important paper on the topic called The Downfall of Jim Jones, written back in 1980. This paper can be found at the University of...
It's with the San Diego State University, and it's also on file with the California Historical Society in San Francisco.
And this paper has had at least 250,000 hits, and after this show we'd like to let you know that it's available for your reading pleasure in its entirety in those two virtual venues. Now let's begin the conversation. How did you first get interested in being an attorney and then became a district attorney? How was that process for you? What was the reason behind it and your personal interest?
Well, I tell people the reason behind it is because I was the dumb one in the family. There are 11 Litkes who collectively have about 400 patents for their inventions in the 20th century. I don't have any patents at all. But compare that to Edison, who had almost 1,100 patents. But anyway, all joking aside, I was a pretty good student in school. Not a genius by a long shot, but better than average. And when I went to UC Berkeley, graduated in 1957. That sounds about right. I'll be 85 tomorrow. May 29th is my birthday. And then when I graduated from college, I didn't know what to do. But I knew I didn't want to go to work. So I thought, well, I'll go to law school. So I did go to law school and found out it was more work than the average 40-hour work week. But anyway, I stuck with it and became a lawyer. I was a deputy district attorney for the first couple of years in my legal career, but I did not want to make a career of criminal law. For example, I did not want to be involved in a murder case, either as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney, because if as a prosecutor I convicted an innocent man, how would I ever, get over that? Or if I was public defender defending an innocent man and he was convicted, how would I get over that? It troubled me to be involved in a case where the death penalty could be involved. But anyway, that's why I became an attorney.
Wow, so you're an attorney with a conscience.
Actually, contrary to popular belief, most attorneys do have consciences, and they're very good people. And the best example of that, of course, would be Abraham Lincoln. Remember, Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer. We, the American people, have been spoiled with Abraham Lincoln. And we've had 45 presidents, counting Grover Cleveland twice, so really 44. Of the 44 or 45 presidents that we've had, how many do you think were humble? I submit only one, and that was Abraham Lincoln.
Now, you went to Hastings Law.
Yes.
And you mentioned that Hastings is actually the oldest corporation in America?
No. Hastings Law School was the University of California's first law school. There used to be a provision in the state constitution that was removed maybe 40 years ago now. But the provision in the state constitution provided that the University of California shall maintain a law school in San Francisco. So that's how Hastings became the University of California's first law school. Now they have several. The oldest corporation in America is Harvard University. And the second oldest is William and Mary. Harvard goes back to 1636, and William and Mary, I think, was 1693. Those are the two oldest corporations in America. Corporations just aren't businesses, you know, like Safeway or IBM. They're also educational institutions. Some of them are.
Okay, let's get to Jim Jones. So right before I was born, a month or so before I was born.
I was guessing that because you're 41. I said you must have been born in 19...
at the end of 1978. 78.
Oh, 78.
December 30th, 78. So about a month before my birth,
yeah,
a tremendous tragic event took place in Jonestown, Guyana.
That's right.
And
on November 18, 1978. My mother's birthday, my mother and father's wedding anniversary, and my sister's birthday.
All on the same day?
All on the same day.
Wow. No wonder you have a profound unconscious connection to this.
Yeah.
So, Jim Jones. Who was Jim Jones?
Well, foremost, Jim Jones was a phony preacher. I believe he was born in Indiana, raised in Indiana, and he eventually became an ordained minister in the Disciples of Christ Church, which is a legitimate Protestant sect in the Christian religion. And of course, the Disciples of Christ didn't realize what they were doing when they admitted him to their priesthood or their clergy.
So, why did people believe him? Why did people need him?
That's a good question, because I can't say that I know the answer for sure, because I don't think sociologists or psychologists know for sure. But anyway,
there's a deer running behind us.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because deer is a very vulnerable, innocent creature. And
yes, he
we're
is.
talking about all the followers of Jim Jones who are very much like deer.
Yes, they were vulnerable. I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect most of them were poor people and had maybe a limited education. That's not true of all of them. Some of them were very well educated and very bright, but I would say the majority of them were probably poor and probably didn't have much more than a high school education. And they probably were people who were suffering from poverty and things like that.
Do you see a similarity between Jim Jones and Hitler and the fact that they were able to inspire, manipulate, and seduce and destroy their followers?
I do see a similarity there. The big difference is, of course, Jim Jones would be small potatoes compared to Hitler, because Hitler killed 6 million Jews.
And many others as well, yeah.
As well as many others, that's right.
Many in my family, yeah.
But Jim Jones is responsible for the deaths of over 900 people, and I also suspect that he was involved in a few murders, maybe 2 or 3 murders anyway, before the event that took place in Jonestown.
Tell me, some people call it a mass suicide event. Some people call it mass murder. How would you describe what happened in terms of legal?
Well, apparently from all of the evidence that we have, it looks like it was half and half. It was half mass suicide and half murder. Those who didn't commit suicide, they were murdered. And there were a little over 900 who were killed at Jonestown, something like 929, something like that. But 1/3 of them were children. Those children did not commit suicide. They were murdered, and here's the mystery. They were murdered by their parents, in most cases probably the mothers, who gave them the poisoned cyanide punch to drink.
So, now, typically a mother wouldn't kill her child. I mean, Medea is a great example in the history of Greek writing about a mother who kills her children because they remind her of the face of the father who is left for another woman. So are you familiar with that one, Medea?
No.
And so here we have mothers killing their children, but in a way unintentionally, correct? Not intentionally, or was it because they were so brainwashed, or what was the missing link?
I think it's obvious that they were brainwashed. I don't think psychiatrists and psychologists or sociologists have figured that out yet. How is it that Jim Jones was able to brainwash them to the extent that he could talk them into killing their own children? In other words, overruling the maternal instinct. Because most mothers, even in the animal world, and of course we're part of the animal world, but the deer or any other animal, the mother will do what the mother can to save the baby deer or the other baby animal. And they have that maternal instinct. It's natural. And of course so do human mothers and human fathers for that matter. And yet somehow they were not able to do what they should have done, and which is not poison their own children, as Jim Jones is encouraging them to do.
He must have definitely promised them some wonderful things. The concepts of communism and extreme liberals, or the extreme left, it's all so connected, because when you're telling people who don't have things and don't know how to get them the proper way sometimes, and you promise and you promise and you say we're going to build this utopia and we're going to give, everybody's going to have equal shares, but you're all really enslaved in the building of something that I want, which is in a way what he did. He basically enslaved these people in order to build a utopia for himself, and then something went wrong and he decided the better utopia would be somewhere else in a different dimension. So that's my kind of understanding. Can you clear that up? Am I getting this correct? Or?
No, I think you're on the right track.
So that's kind of similar to what Hitler did too, and this promise, this over-promising that all of you are burdened and we will create something together, everybody will be equal, and all of a sudden people, they believe that that everything is equal and the same, and whatever they don't have, they shall have, and then there's this change in the road. So they were building something, they were building a society, and then all of a sudden everything got killed. So there must have been a situation of some sort that made him change his mind. Is there any suggestion as to what that was?
To change Jones' mind, you mean?
Yeah, because originally, they were building like a giant kibbutz kind of thing.
I'm not so sure that that's the case, because Jones was dishonest from the beginning. He was performing these false healings in his church. He was involved in sexual abuse with adults and children, and physical abuse, and stealing property from his parishioners and things like that.
But my question to you is, if everybody went over there to build a utopian land, just for the purpose of being killed or slaughtered, it doesn't really kind of fully make sense. It feels to me like they all went there and something went wrong, and then he just said, screw this, let's die. Is there anything on record about what happened there, or no?
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as something went wrong, I guess one of the major things that went wrong was when Congressman Lee Litke, because he was getting complaints about the People's Temple, Jones's church, and things that were going on there, when he decided to go down to Guyana and see for himself, so he and a small party went with him, and of course he was killed while he was down there. And my friend David Kahn, who was, to the best of my knowledge, the only hero in the whole Jim Jones story, he predicted correctly that if Leo Ryan went down to Jonestown, he would be killed. And I agreed with him. I thought Leo Ryan was taking a big chance, and we tried to get word to Leo Ryan, not to go down there because he would be risking his life, but he didn't take the warning seriously, obviously.
Now let's discuss your position in this, because what you try to do, we're going to get into this, in a way you try to warn, you try to say, wake up, this is a serious problem that's going to occur, and people did not listen until something bad happened.
Oh, that's right. Not just me, but David Kahn.
Right.
We both tried to warn people, even about the possible assassination of Congressman Leo Ryan, as well as the mass suicide and mass murder, and before it happened. And I have to give David Kahn credit for that. He's the one who said, well, if Congressman Ryan goes there, he will be killed, and he was. And then when it hit the news media that he was killed, David Kahn said, well, we got to do something, because this is going to be followed by a mass murder and a mass suicide. Now we didn't act in the dark on that, because both David Kahn and I were aware that the People's Temple had practiced suicide drills in the church on at least 2 or 3 occasions.
Now, what's a suicide drill? I mean, suicide means you kill yourself. What's a drill?
Well, they were
pretend to kill yourself.
They were told to pretend you were taking poison or pointing a gun at your head and killing yourself. And on one occasion, he had them drink, I don't know if it's Coca-Cola or what it was, but he had them drink this, pretending that you're killing yourself. Then after they drank it, he says, guess what? There's poison in it. Of course there wasn't. He was playing with them.
So this
but that towards the fact that he was having these drills was a real possibility. It could happen for real.
Okay, so let me just go back to him for a second and figure this out. So, number one, was his reasoning to the people the fact that this would be a sure pass to heaven?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what all of his reasoning was, and I don't know why people would believe him, but he would tell people, among other things, that he was God. He would take the Bible, throw it down on the floor of the People's Temple Church, and jump up and down on it and say, see, if there's a God in heaven, let him strike me dead now. And then they'd say, the prisoners, but he didn't. He didn't do it, did he? He didn't do it because he's not God, I'm God. And apparently a lot of these people believe that. It's hard for me to picture that. I think of, I go to the Presbyterian church, and I'm in a Sunday school there, and there's about 20 in the class, and I know all these people, just ordinary citizens like me, and I just don't think any one of them would believe that. They would see if a preacher did something like that, plus other things that Jim Jones did on the pulpit, they just wouldn't come back to his church. They would realize that he was a phony, there was something wrong with him.
So it's a combination of promises and magnetism. Right? So a sure way to heaven, I would imagine. But also, what about Jim Jones? I've seen him speak on camera, when he recently, well, from that time period, I mean. And he had a very kind of what cult leaders are known to have, a very kind of syrupy voice. He spoke slowly, methodically, in an entangled kind of manner. He would easily use reverse psychology to make somebody feel bad.
He had charisma, I guess.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What exactly made him have that magnetism? What kind of personality traits? Is there anything that you picked up on?
No, I don't know why he had that personality or those traits, but he did. I don't know if his upbringing was poor or what. I think people who have that magnetism is just sort of natural with them, like some of the presidents do, like John F. Kennedy. He had that magnetism, and I don't think it's something you can really practice and become good at. You're just born with that gift.
Well, magnetism can be turned on and off.
Yes.
When somebody is resting, or for example goes into their family life or whatever, their magnetism can turn off, and then when you're performing or when you're doing something, it can turn on. So the question is, what ignites it, and what ignited him to spellbind these people?
Well, Jim Jones claims that when he was young, maybe 13 or 14 or 15 years old, he became aware of the injustices and the mistreatment of black people, and he felt sorry for them and wanted to do what he could to help them. And I think he started out maybe on the right path, but what caused him to deviate and end up, I mean, Jim Jones killed more black people than the Ku Klux Klan did.
Well, interestingly enough, he also adopted an African-American man and called him Jim Jones Jr.
That's right.
Who's still alive as far as I know, and who was a very smart man who I heard basically say, you know, his father was Jim Jones was an awful man, but that he appreciates the way he was raised, the good parts of it. So it was interesting that he also had 9 children, including an African American son. Now,
even his own son said the same, something similar about him.
Now let's get specifically to your writing.
Yeah.
Tell me why you wrote this and what it is exactly to the audience. What is the experience and why?
Okay, here's the why. First of all, I'm not a writer, but my friend David Kahn had his son-in-law, George Kleinman, and another fellow by the name of Sherman Butler, who was a childhood friend of mine and an editor with some couple of different book companies along the way, and David decided he would write a book about this, and he did the book called The Cult That, I think it was called The Cult That Died. But anyway, so David and George Kleinman and Sherman Butler were working on it together, but as it turns out, David actually didn't write a word in it. The whole book was written by Sherman and his son-in-law, so they had a falling out. And Sherman and his son-in-law, George Kleinman, didn't want Dave's name on the book. So a lawsuit was threatened, and I can't remember if a lawsuit was actually filed or not, but it certainly was threatened. And so I was sort of stuck in the middle because Sherman Butler was a good friend of mine and was until the day he died. He died maybe 10 years ago now. And anyway, so I said, well, they didn't appreciate. David was like the gold mine, and they were like the gold miners, and they couldn't have written the book without consulting with Dave, and because David had the facts and they didn't. But then they had this dispute. So I pointed out to Dave, well, Dave was aware his story was not in the book. So I told him, I said, what I'll do is I'll write your story for you. We'll send it to the publisher and see if they could include it in your book, the book written by the three of you. But the Putnam, I think, was the publisher. They did not want to get involved in the dispute whatsoever, so that did not happen. But I wrote it hurriedly, so we could get it to Putnam before The Cult That Died was actually published. Anyway, so that's why I wrote what I wrote.
Okay, wonderful. And now let's talk about what you wrote. Just for the audience to understand how you and David are connected to this in the first place, and also what is this missing story about? Okay.
Well, first of all, David and I became friends over 60 years ago, and then David, I believe he was raised in Richmond, California, and I got to I'm not a native Californian, but anyway, I've lived here since I was, we moved to Oakland when I was 8 years old, and then later I met David. David, I guess he was dating Donna Kahn, his ex-wife now, and Donna was married to another man before who was a good friend of mine by the name of Ronald Black. And I think when Ronald Black died, then Donna got involved with David Kahn and became his wife, and that was when I met David. And so we've been friends for many, many years. Okay, David attended the Barrett Avenue Christian Church in Richmond, And there were some members of that church who left the church and joined the People's Temple. And so one or two of them, including David, were asked to leave the Barrett Avenue Christian Church because David was pushing for integration, racial integration in the schools and neighborhoods and things like that. And he and these others were not appreciated in those days for taking that stand. So anyway, that's how we got involved in the Jim Jones thing, because some of those people plus other people who became defectors, and they were good friends of David Kahn, some of them were, and like the ones at the Barrett Avenue Christian Church. And then they told David what was going on in the church, and that caused David to begin to look into it. He actually spent about 8 years investigating Jim Jones and trying to warn the police and the press about Jim Jones.
Now, in our society, this has happened many times where there's, do you need anything more to drink?
No, I'm fine.
So in our society, you know, when there's horrible situations like mass shootings and things like that, sometimes people come out of the woodwork and they say, you know, we warned, we called the police, we warned that our neighbor was a crazy person, and that they're collecting unnecessary guns and things. And it's like, all people hear back is, well, we couldn't do anything because, you know, there was no threat, there was no crime, so nothing could be done. Your work, the fact that you tried so hard to protect this situation from not happening, what could in the future, is there any advice for America to listen when somebody has something smart to say?
You know, David was convinced there was going to be this mass suicide. I was a little bit skeptical, but I knew something bad was going to happen. And had we warned the FBI, they would not have believed us. They would have thought we were crazy, and they would have ignored what we had to say. And I don't think the situation has changed today, unfortunately. I mean, that's why we see these, like you say, these shootings, and then they say, well, we had these warnings, but they were ignored. That happens a lot, and I think will continue to happen. And part of it, I guess, is because of the legal system that we have, you need evidence. and without the evidence, you don't get very far. And of course, the police and the press is going to be skeptical.
So basically, what we really need in this society is some kind of quality system of just feedback. You know, not the kind of system where people spy on each other, and if you have somebody who hates, you just make something up. Not like that. But a place where, I mean, you, for example, you had an amazing resume, a great record, a respected attorney, and still you weren't listened to, and it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And we tried to warn the press as well as the police. And David was even in contact with a T-man. The FBI, they're the G-men. Treasury agents, they're the T-men. And they both investigate crimes, of course. And David was feeding this information to the Treasury Department as well as the local police and San Francisco police.
Now, if we were to summarize this paper that you've written, which is 26 pages, what was your warning and what was the proof?
What was my warning?
What was you were trying to say, hey, wait a second, you know, let's stop this before it happens. If you were to concisely state, you know, to the essence of this paper into the warning itself.
Oh, okay. Well, in short, it's a story about how David Kahn got this information about what was going on in the Jim Jones Church, and then how he tried to bring Jim Jones to justice by notifying not only the police but also the press. And most of the stories that appeared in the press and even in some books written subsequent to the event, were based upon information that the reporters got from David Kahn. Not just from David Kahn, but also from the victims who became defectors. He informed the press who they were. Like the Myrtles, for example, and Larry Tupper and people like that. Larry Tupper wasn't in the People's Temple itself, but his wife was, and he lost his wife and 3 children at Jonestown. And so anyway, David Kahn would tell the press, well, here's a man who knows what's going on, and the Myrtles know what's going on. He gave them names and put them in touch with the press to, confirm the things that David was saying.
I see.
But they were really basically ignored.
Amazing. Amazingly sad.
Yeah.
And I heard from one of the defectors who ran out that particular day and ran through the forests and said that they were waiting. The lady said that, to paraphrase her, that basically she was aware that she could be shot at any moment as she was running away, that before, while everybody was beginning to drink that poison. And but she survived, and some people survived, and they made that choice. They ran away.
David lived in fear for his life. So he had to hide out.
For how long?
I would say, I don't know, a couple of years anyway.
Now tell me, is there any of this that's still relevant in the sense that, is there any offshoot of this church? Are there any like cult leaders or people connected to this that are still practicing?
I don't think there's anything left to the People's Temple, but I think there probably are some crooked preachers out there. Maybe not quite as evil as Jim Jones, but this sort of thing, I think, goes on all the time.
And why do you think it goes on? What is it that people...
Well, you talked about going to heaven. I don't know if that was during this program or earlier. People want to go to heaven when they die, so they go to church. I'm playing it safe myself and going to church.
So it's fast lane.
You could call it that. But I don't know what else to say about it. It's just part of the human condition, and it's a weakness that many people have, and they fall for a lot of this stuff that the con men are putting out, not just in the religious field, but in other fields as well.
Do you believe that these cons tie into communism or socialism?
Well, yeah, a lot of what Jim Jones was preaching was communism or socialism, and a lot of people like that because it means, they think it means, well, I'll be taken care of. They'll provide for my medical care. They'll see that I have food to eat and drink and so forth and so on. So it makes them feel comfortable and safe. And so I think it attracts them that way. They don't realize the benefits of capitalism. I'm not a capitalist either, but I live in a capitalist society, and I'm aware that these capitalists are the men who built America, and guys like John D. Rockefeller, he may have had his faults, but he created thousands of jobs, and that's what others are doing, and that's why America works so well, because it's a capitalist welfare society. It's not a socialist society.
Well, this has been a fantastic interview. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation?
I wish I could say people should be, well, I will say people should be aware and try to involve getting mixed up with people like Jim Jones. But unfortunately, I think there will be others in the future, maybe not as outstanding. I'm trying to think of another incident. Probably the other most common incident of mass suicide was Masada. Now, you probably know about Masada yourself, but the bulk of the American people, probably the bulk of the people in the world, do not know what Masada was. 2,000 years ago, in Rome, the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire conquered the Jewish state, and were taxing them. They wanted the Jews, some of the Jews, of course, they resisted that. And there was a band of Jewish soldiers who took refuge at Masada, which was a mountaintop in or near Israel. And there they stood off the Roman army for about 2 years. But the Romans were great engineers. They built a ramp up to the top of the mountain, and with that ramp, the Roman army was able to go to the top of the mountain. And then when the Jewish soldiers, and I'm not sure the number, but I think there were at least 200 or 300 of them, when they saw the Roman soldiers coming, they knew it was all over. They didn't want to become slaves. They didn't want to be tortured, and so they did. The only thing they had, alternative they had left, was to commit suicide. So they committed suicide. But there's a big difference. These Jewish soldiers,
it's just like the Japanese samurai.
Yeah, well, they died for a noble cause.
Right.
They were resisting the oppressors.
Right.
You can't say that the people who died at Jonestown died for a noble cause. Right. They died for an ignoble cause. That's the big difference. But those would be the two, in all of history, those are the two most outstanding examples of mass suicide.
Okay. As we mentioned, the Jonestown is half mass suicide, half mass murder, or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, Larry, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Oh, just to put it in perspective, I don't think we've ever got the date in. This interview is today, which is May 28, of the year 2020.
That's right. Right before your 85th birthday.
Right before my birthday.
Happy upcoming birthday.
Thank you again.
Thanks for being on the Archetypal Mosaic, Larry.
Thank you.